Hey friends, welcome to our Midweek Moment. Pastor Nicole here. Well, this week we continued on in our sermon series, Beautiful Resistance, the Life of Daniel. And we talked about the story from the book of Daniel about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and how they are thrown into a fiery furnace because they take part in an act of beautiful resistance by refusing to bow down to worship this huge golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has put into place. And we talked about how they kind of doubted, maybe a little bit, about whether God would save them. They said, if our God can save us, if our God can save us. But they took that step of faith anyway. And they said, if our God can save us, he will. But if he can't, we're still not going to bow down and worship that statue. And so we talked about how having doubts in life is completely normal, and how sometimes we do have to take a step of faith, even in the midst of doubt, even when we're not sure what is going on in our life. We're not sure how things are going to turn out. And we're just kind of in this midst of uncertainty, that we sometimes are called to take a step of faith in the midst of that. I was having a conversation with my son about the sermon, and he said, Mom, do you think that God would save us today if we were in that same situation? Like if we were going to be thrown into a fiery furnace for not doing what somebody commanded us, would God save us today? And I thought that's a really great question, because sometimes we think about these Bible stories and we think like, well, that was back then, in like, because we kind of think of it like, this fantastical time in the Bible, and it can kind of feel more like story than like truth, right? And so it does make us wonder, like, but what about today? Like in our reality, would God save us from death if we were thrown into a fiery furnace like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? And the answer is, I don't know. The answer is, I want to answer just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to say, if God will save us, God will. But if not, I'm still doing the right thing by honoring God. And that's really, I think, the lesson that we have to take away from this story, is that even today we can have our doubts about whether God acts in our life the way that he does in the Bible. Is God going to be as real to us and as obvious to us and show up when we need God to show up, or not? Right? So it's easy to have those doubts and to think that God doesn't do that now. God doesn't act that way now. But I don't think that's true. I think God still is acting. I think God still is speaking. I think God is still very much a part of our lives. And would we be saved? I think I would hope that I would be able to be like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and take the step of faith, even in the midst of my doubt. That I would be able to say, I'm going to trust that God's going to be with me no matter what happens. And so that's kind of what I've been thinking about this week, is how does God show up in the midst of our doubts? I think it happens all the time, obviously not in such extreme examples as a fiery furnace, but God is still moving in our lives. And there's a lot of times when we have doubt and uncertainty and we're just not sure, and God shows us the way. God shows up. He stands with us. He gives us courage to make the right decision. And yeah, I think this is such a great story. It's kind of one for the ages, right? It is sort of like larger than life, but it is so practical to our everyday lives. So I just want you to kind of think about that this week. Where is it that God is calling you to maybe step out in faith, even when you're just not sure that you could do it? Where is it that you are hoping God will show up for you in your life, and you're just clinging to hope that he will, even in the midst of your doubts? And maybe you can spend some time processing through that with God through prayer. So will God show up if we were in the same situation? I think he would. I think he would. Maybe not in the ways that we always expect, but I do believe God is still moving today. So that's a lot to process and a lot to think through, and a lot of faith that's needed in the midst of doubt. But I think we can do it. I think we can have that faith even in the midst of doubt. It's kind of like a balancing act, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego just show us how we can do that. How we can have uncertainties, like doesn't seem like God is going to be able to save us from this terrible situation, and yet God did. So as you go about your week, just ponder on that, pray on that, spend some time meditating on that, and join us this weekend. We're going to wrap up our Daniel series with the most famous story from Daniel, Daniel in the lion's den. So you won't want to miss that. Join us, whether in person or online. Hope you have a great rest of your week. Take care, and we'll see y'all soon. Bye.